25 mark question, Edexcel A-level economics. Now, this will appear once in your paper 1, once in your paper 2, and twice in your paper 3. This means it accounts for 100 of your 335 marks, which makes up around 30% of your entire A-level. The way the marks are allocated for the 25 mark question are 4K marks, 4 application marks, 8 analysis marks, and 9 evaluation marks. This is the exact reason why I, and hopefully your teachers as well, greatly emphasize the importance of being able to develop that step-by-step chain of analysis and also being able to write sufficient, accurate evaluation points. And especially in 25 mark questions, a disproportionate amount of marks are awarded towards that. And the worst thing is, if you're not confident with writing chains of analysis, you're not confident with evaluating, you are really going to be exposed in these 25 mark questions and score nowhere near those top bands, those top levels. Therefore, you could really limit yourself to maybe around 10 marks. So this question is all about depth of analysis, depth of evaluation. Now, in your paper 1 and paper 2, this 25 mark question will be located in section C. That means there are absolutely no extracts to back this up. This is why throughout the year we emphasize students and we encourage students to keep up with the news, keep up with real world events, learn those examples of industries, those macroeconomic stats, as it's absolutely imperative here to be able to use your own knowledge and from your own brain to be able to churn out and be able to pump out stats, figures, like I said, industries, so you can pick up those application marks and show your examiner you have an appreciation, you know what's going on in the real world of economics. As if you haven't spent the time learning these real world stats, you will unfortunately be exposed in this question and it will reflect very poorly in your marks. This page here shows the mark scheme, and the maximum you can get is 16 marks, because there are 16 KA marks. So like we said before, what is the breakdown? 8 analysis marks, 4 application, 4 K marks, therefore adding to 16. But this is how your examiner will mark your 25 mark question. And if you have a deeper look into it, it's marked in terms of levels. And to achieve a level, to move up to the next level, you have to hit every single one of the points in that level. And this is why having application is of utmost importance. So let's look at level 4. So to achieve those A and A star grades or anywhere around that, what do you need in terms of application? So the exam and what the examiners want is ability to link knowledge and understanding in context using appropriate examples. So that is exactly what you want to be aiming for. So if you know your examples, you know how to integrate your examples into your chain of analysis, that is what the examiners want. And that is exactly what we and your teachers should be advising. And let's look at the lowest level. Well, the lowest level is having absolutely nothing. But the first level, so level 1, is use of generic or irrelevant information or examples. So you still have examples, but they're not specifically relevant. They don't actually prove anything. They don't really link to your chains of analysis. Now, if you haven't spent the time, if you haven't invested the time learning these examples, learning these industries, you likely will have to give generic, not very relevant examples. And this is where the outcome, like I said, is quite tragic. As if the examiner really thinks you're lacking on application, even if you're writing A-star chains of analysis, your content knowledge is sound throughout the essay, if your application is the limitation, it means you will be limited to level 1, meaning that the highest you can score for your KAA marks out of 16 is 4. So even if you have that A-star chain of analysis, but your application is lacking, this is why we emphasize you need to have a holistic approach to your essays. You need to be improving every single part of it. So your content knowledge, then your application, then your chains of analysis. Then make sure you don't go off topic either. So improving that all together and not just improving certain sectors. As remember, you are marked in levels and you have to achieve every single thing in that level to move up to the next level. Now, with regards to paragraph structure, what would I suggest? So I would suggest we're starting with an intro. So in the intro, it's quite simple. Define your key terms, so 2 key terms should be fine. And then just tell your examiner what you are going to write in your essay. And the reason why you know what you're going to write is because the main thing I always emphasize students, and one of the commonality I've seen between every single A-star student I tutor, usually because I tell them to do it, but the main commonality I see between all A-star students is that they all plan. especially for these larger answer questions, your 15, your 25s, even the smaller ones if you want to, like your 12, your 5s, your 8s. But you need to plan your 25 mark question. If you do not plan your 25 mark question, you're going to be all over the place. One of the precursors to a step-by-step chain of analysis is having an organised argument, having an organised chain of analysis. Because if the chain of analysis is not organised, it cannot be step-by-step, basically. So by planning is a small investment. I would take 2 to 3 minutes. Just try to brainstorm what you're thinking about the question. So for example here, whether a monopoly is likely to operate efficiently, just try to brainstorm what you would write for that, and therefore it will mean that in your intro you can also tell the examiner exactly what you're going to write about. So for example, if you were going to write about productive efficiency, allocative efficiency, I didn't even think about the question there, but if you were going to write about those two, I'd say in this essay I will discuss how monopolies are neither productively or allocatively efficient but can be dynamically efficient, for example. So then after your intro, which should maximum take you about a minute, if you want to plan before that, so probably all that would take you about 3 to 4 minutes. But yeah, now into the main paragraphs. So of course, then your KA paragraph, I would have one KA paragraph, then obviously evaluation. One thing examiners will be looking for in your 25 mark question is evaluation throughout the body of your essay, which is this, and then so evaluating throughout. And then another thing examiners will be looking for is a large chunk of evaluation at the end, which we'll get to. But yeah, so KA paragraph, then evaluation, then second KA paragraph, and then second evaluation paragraph. So now we have 2 KA paragraphs, 2 evaluation paragraphs, but that is not it. So for the 25 mark question, it's a bit unique, where at the end now you have to throw in a final judgment. And with regards to the final judgment, I have a full video on that. I would not be able to do it justice in a small amount of time, so I'll link that down below, or you can find it somewhere on my channel. Moving on, a classic question I get every year is always to do with how many chains of analysis should I write? How in depth should I go with my chains of analysis? A lot of students want like a certain number, but short answer, write as in-depth, as step-by-step as possible. When I tutor one-on-one, one of the biggest things I'm trying to get these students to do is write a step-by-step chains of analysis. And I have never met a student initially who writes step-by-step chains of analysis. It is 99% likely that you have absolutely no idea how to write step-by-step chains of analysis. I personally believe it is the biggest skill in economics, and it is the main determinant of your end grade. Your ability to write that step-by-step chain of analysis, it translates to every question. It translates to every sector of economics. From all of your section B to section C to your paper 3 where you have to do basically section B twice, it is where the marks are at. If you're unable to do the skill of writing chains of analysis, it is very likely you will not be scoring anywhere near the A or A star grades. And that wasn't to scare you. I will be uploading several videos to try help students improve their chain of analysis and moving towards becoming a bit more step by step with the chain of analysis. Back to the question, you should only stop writing your chains of analysis when you've squeezed out every single possible detail and there's nothing else to write. You should never stop prematurely. Like I've had students say, their teacher said you should only write 8 chains of analysis, so as soon as they reach 8, they stop. Never do that, please, because one of the biggest ways you pick up marks is just being step by step. So when you are basically exhausted every option, when there's nothing else to write, there's no more detail you can add, you should stop there. And of course, you might get to a level where you can write humongous chains of analysis, which is quite unlikely, but there may be a few people watching this that can get to that level. But of course, you do still need to keep in mind timing, because yes, you can write a massive chain of analysis, but you need to do that in your second paragraph as well. Then you also need to write a final judgment. So just like with every single other question in Edexcel, you still need to keep it in mind and at the front of your mind, timing. Now, we've spoke a lot about chains of analysis being step by step, but how do we do that? And one way you can do that is via diagrams. If there is a relevant diagram, 100% do throw it in, but then it's about how you use your diagram. That is another difference between an A and an A star student and then like a C and a D grade student. Yeah, they will both throw in an accurate diagram, but then it depends how they incorporate that into their essay. The A and A star students draw the relevant diagram, then allow it to drive their chain of analysis. This means including the diagram in your essay as much as possible. For example, P1, P2, Q1, Q2, including the shifts as much as possible, but then having a very solid grasp of what the diagram actually means and the theory behind the diagram. For example, classic question that comes up all the time is market failure. And what's a relevant diagram to market failure? Externalities, whether that be negative or positive externalities. Lots of students know the diagrams for positive and negative externalities, but there's only a handful, and it's the top level students that actually understand the theory and understand the backing behind the diagram, understanding what all those curves mean. So demand equals MPB, what that actually means, and how this all interrelates together, and how we can use the diagram to explain the theory. So the top level students are able to use the diagrams to help explain the theory. It's that deeper understanding where the lower level students will just parrot fashion, they'll learn the diagrams, they'll know where the curves go, but the higher level students will know actually what these curves mean and how they relate holistically to the rest of economics. Moving on, I've been speaking a lot about developing a step-by-step chain of analysis, so I thought I'd just write out a nice step-by-step chain of analysis as an example. So the question here is around the topic of monopolies exploiting consumers. A legal monopoly has more than 25% market share. This market share gives the monopoly power to set prices, which the monopoly uses to profit maximize at the point MC equals MR, which aligns with the classical economic assumption. This means monopolies produce at quantity Q max and price P max. The quantity Q max is lower than the quantity would be in a competitive market, meaning less choice for consumers due to scarcity. This scarcity leads to prices being driven up higher than a competitive market price, as shown on the diagram as Pmax, meaning consumers are faced with a combination of lower choice and higher prices, overall leading to worsened consumer welfare. The monopoly's higher price also has a regressive effect. You're trying to drag out that chain of analysis to allow yourself to show the examiner you know that content knowledge, because the examiner has no idea how much you've revised. You have to show it in your essay. You have to show it by writing to the examiner how much you know. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with a step-by-step chain of analysis, but you also need to make sure you keep it relevant. As the higher Pmax price is charged to all consumers, this higher price is a larger percentage of low income individuals' total income, meaning it disproportionately affects the low income backgrounds, worsening income inequality. Then if I was actually writing an essay, I would throw in maybe a Lorenz curve, maybe some Gini coefficient stats to back it up. But obviously this is just an example. I hope it demonstrates what I mean by a step-by-step chain of analysis. Moving on, with regards to valuation, it is very similar, being in depth, being step by step, and here I'll show you the difference between a simple evaluation point and a developed evaluation point, which is required, and the types of evaluation points you want to be writing to hit those 9 out of 9 evaluation marks in your 25 mark question. So this is a scenario we'll be using to evaluate. So the question would be something on a sugar tax and how the sugar tax can solve the market failure of overconsumption of fizzy drinks. Now, a simple evaluation point would go something like this. So, however, this depends on the price elasticity of demand of the good, as if the goods demand is inelastic, quantity demanded will not reduce significantly, thus meaning the tax is ineffective. Now, why is that a good evaluation point? Because in one of your paragraphs, you would have likely written about how a tax can solve the market failure of sugary drinks and the overconsumption of sugary drinks. So a direct evaluation to that, and this point would work really well. Now, here is the issue. This, in its basic form, is a really good point, but it's just not detailed enough to score those higher marks. So how would we get this simple evaluation point to the top level, to that A-star evaluation point? That strength of content knowledge that you're able to confidently link different parts of the spec together really builds up to build these large, strong evaluation points. So let's get started. However, this depends on the PED of the good. As sugar is addictive in its nature, this means consumers exert habitual behaviour, meaning despite a significant increase in the price of sugary drinks, consumer demand will not fall significantly, rendering the government policy to reduce overconsumption, thus improve the health of the population, useless. This would be classed as government failure, as the government has intervened in the market to improve the allocation of resources, but it has actually led to a worsened allocation, higher prices, and no significant reduction in quantity demanded. And you can end it off by saying, thus, a misallocation of resources. So this perfectly illustrates the difference between a lower level evaluation and a higher level evaluation. It shows the difference in depth. It shows the ability, and it shows the ability of the writer, of the student, where an A-star student he's confident in his content knowledge. He's able to link these different topic areas together, where we link market failure to government failure, then to like consumer inertia, habitual behavior. So all these topic links coming together to present a really strong and a really well-developed evaluation point. Now, the thing that makes me deeply sad about this is that a lot of you watching this video will actually have this level of content knowledge. You will have learned this, you will have revised this, but the thing that is stopping you writing evaluation points like this is you just not writing it step by step. Like I always say, assume your examiner has zero content knowledge, so you want to explain everything in a slow, step-by-step manner and present your content knowledge. The examiner can only give you marks on what you show them. They do not know how much you revised, how much is in your mind. You have to leave everything on that paper. And this is the exact reason why we call economics a double-edged sword. Content is difficult, but then exam technique is a beast in itself, where both these students probably would have had the same level of content knowledge, but one student just focused on exam technique a lot more. Moving on, my usual advice to students is try to aim for 2 evaluation points like this at the end of your paragraphs. So in your evaluation 1 paragraph, there should be try to aim for 2 points like that, and then in your evaluation 2, try to aim for 2 points just like that. But of course, like always in Edexcel economics, it all depends on timing. If you are running out of time, one of these evaluation points can suffice. And a few of you may be asking, how on earth do I get to this depth of valuation? It's just practice. Practice being step by step. I should release a lot more videos on this concept of being step by step, but constant practice. I would just write as many essays as possible, try to improve from each one. So if you've written something really simple, ask yourself after you've written it, how can I improve? How can I be more step by step? And that just constant cycle of repeating and improving from your mistakes. Slowly but surely, if you put the hours in, you should improve.